Hi, Stuart. Thanks for the talk. Apologies for the multi-part question. It's all around performance. So you said earlier on in the 22 months of the existence of the company, you targeted high-performance computing, and you put up the figure about 190 gigabytes per second per node. First part of the question is there, like CFFS, a POSIX layer that can go on top of XARBA so that Dinosaur HPC users like myself can use file systems?
Yeah. So that is, if I was giving you our marketing slide, the very next thing you would have seen on that was Rust has got a lovely PNFS crate, right? So the only difference between S3 and the next state is S3 is immutable, whereas for you sort of need to add appending. Appending is the only feature, write into a file, write somewhere, and then the parallel NFS crate on top. So indeed, we're looking for, we've been talking with people who, in the HPC world, that use S3, but the number one thing is file systems, of course. So we're certainly very keen on that. We're hoping to get to that in April this year. So
cool. So part 2 of 3 then is, would you be targeting an IO 500 run on?
If we had a partner, yeah, absolutely. It's like we have got, I've got 16 racks of gear, which isn't, that's just what I've got. We're looking to partner with someone who has a higher level of compute and storage.
You mean a funding partner?
Yeah, potentially, yeah.
So the final part is part 3, and this is that might feed into it. So if not a POSIX file system, then if you were going for ultimate performance and you just wanted to talk from the clients to the storage back end,
yes,
talk S3 protocol, say over something like a PyTorch S3 connector, do you have any? So the performance figure you quoted was for a server. Do you have any idea about the scalability of, say, if it's being hit by 10,000 clients? If you had 10 servers, 10,000 clients, how does that work?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. So we use Mellanox cards just so we can have the RDMA performance. Our servers for that particular one, a 4-node system, for example, has got 4 200 gig cards. Theoretical, most of them get to 800. We sort of get up to 760 across the 4 cards, and that's purely just the RDMA is super efficient. So our boxes have either 1 or 2 trays of 102 drives. So we have, 2-ish, 3-ish petabytes per server. And we've got about 20 of those. So that's the sort of the scale we were sort of going for was the sort of hardware we inherited, but we're interested in the sort of numbers that other people talk about. We usually have got less compute and more storage. The ratio is usually inverted with us, right? So we're very interested in, working with people who've got the other way around. But not everyone needs all the compliance features. Our bottom layer, storage layer, amazingly called Slayer for the storage layer, right? Like, effectively, that's if you know exactly where things are, you don't want to have to put up with the craziness of S3 having to check some things and parts, and you just want the ultimate speed. Like, that's line speed for any, it's just really, really simple. It's the standards, the file systems that sort of slow you down. So I'm happy to talk to you offline. I'll be very interested in we're sort of pulled in this direction by these people. That's why Nicholas, invited us down here so we can be pulled in other interesting directions as well, which is cool.
You mentioned about the hardware that you inherited, and well, some of us know the story about that inheritance. There was another company out there. Did you factor that into the 1.5 million?
So the previous company, it was sort of down here actually. Actually, the founders met here for Nereid, and they were doing GPU accelerated block devices. The market was really. I started off as an investor in that company, and they ended up spending a lot, 20s of millions of dollars. Wow. The reason why I didn't mention it, Nicholas, is because Peter and I bought all of those assets for a stock.
Right.
No money.
Yeah.
So no money changed hands.
So 1.5 is impressive, but I just wonder, as an accountant, how are you calculating that?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. because we bought the previous company for shares, so yeah. So we end up having this lovely test rig. As we all know, new gear's fantastic; it never fails. But we've got 5,000 drives that are constantly failing in all sorts of horrible ways. So you make sure your code's actually bulletproof. It's actually really hard to find gear that you can use for those test cases.
Jason.
All right, so I guess I had a couple. One of the last jokes you told was about running this on your phone. So what's the business case for wanting to run a server on the phone?
I was trying to think of what's the worst machine you could think of that was easy to explain.
Okay.
Right? If I had said you could run it on every one of your Huawei routers, so that every house could have a backup target, right, that was sort of backup approved, or there's lots of example things, In my mind, I like putting Androids in drones and having your cloud storage in the sky. There's all sorts of funny things you can go there, but it's really just to demonstrate on the smallest, cheapest possible processors. It's still really fast. I think we were getting over Spark, which obviously must be a good service. We were getting something like 25 megabits storage to our phone. So through the 4G network to it's crazily good, right? So yeah, it was just to demonstrate the everywhere concept.
Okay.
And then as soon as you start talking to people about it, people have then taken that concept and have their own ideas. They've got their own edge ideas and IoT ideas and sort of a fertility kind of conversation. So people go, oh yeah, what could we do? So.
Yes, Jess?
I also think the future of sovereignty is nothing's more sovereign than your own pants.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. That's mostly I was going to ask about that too. That's mostly a geopolitical concern.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jess?
Yeah, I'm wondering, completely different topic here. We're talking about developer productivity. So I guess I'm thinking about, we've had the code agents in the first talk, and now you've talked about what it's cost you to build something in Rust. How are you guys approaching, Claude Code and what that's going to do to your dev team? And you've obviously had this big productivity improvement with moving to Rust. One of the things I've seen with Rust that often gets talked about is actually these are really great for agents, because agents are kind of like not your senior devs, they're like your junior crappy devs, but you've got all of this other tooling that then helps you, things like cargo and so on. How do you see that playing out for your software dev team over the next 12 months?
Yeah. So as an investor, we had a meeting of our portfolio companies last week, and there's a real movement, I think, that people used to be a developer, and perhaps a number of you can attest to this, and you're a developer and you're sort of promoted to management because maybe you could get along with your team, right? And maybe people saw management as a way of earning more, right? And so a number of the best portfolio companies we've had are the owner, founders with the technical people, because they didn't have to impart their wisdom to their product owners, right? They can completely understand what to do, why they would do, talk to that. But they'd eventually as the company grew, they'd have to insert a layer and things turned to custard. What we're seeing more of is people going, I'm actually 100 times better as being a coder with these tools than someone who I could hire. I'm hiring the CEO and they're losing their ego so much, and they're sort of hiring all the management layer around them. So the best coders being the most productive they could be. We're seeing a real sort of shift, really, away from that kind of promotion and just saying, a friend of mine 10 years ago who was a surgeon said, if I go into management, am I still a surgeon, right? I was a surgeon, now I'm not, now I'm a manager, right? If I want to describe myself as a surgeon, I have to keep doing surgery. And I'm seeing more and more of that same thing for the coders. The coders, of those 25 packages, I may have written 15 of them, right? It's crazy, right? Even though they're less important ones, there's no doubt about that. But it basically enables us to be really productive. And we've had the more junior interns, of which we've had a lot of interns, because we're based at Waikato University. We looked after 42 interns in one group and 11 in another, and we had them doing different kinds of things, testing and just networking things, and actually keeping the core developers using the tools more. So it's becoming even more of a long tail, I'd say. These people are really productive, and
I was going to say what we're seeing is actually at that very senior level. They're the biggest users of LLM tokens for coding and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I guess the big question in my head is this all just a bunch of VPs that think they can reclaim their coding youth and are just churning out crap, which is probably like me, but
I don't think so.
Or is this genuinely actually you need to have that management experience to really run agents well? It's a big question.
I was just talking about how I wake up in the middle of the night, 3:00, and I check on my agents, and I go to the toilet and check things, and I go back, and I'm constantly looking after my army of. Some people might remember my favourite game, Lemmings. Right, but that's exactly how I think of it. I've got Claude, I've got Replit, I've got ChatGPT, I'm always logging in, checking them all. I've got like 20 tabs. We were onboarding someone, and I took all the documents I had, and I fed them through as a cycle of the 3 different agents that I use. And I said, make like an onboarding book, and it was like a book. And a friend of mine said, I could probably get that published with Wiley, and so she's doing that. I'm like, this is crazy how an onboarding thing for. Point at ChatGPT to review Claude, to fix this kind of stuff. And I think it's making the more senior people better than ever.
Anna.
You have compute attached to the storage. Can we use that to apply some expressions on the data as we write it?
So that was always a vision. In the backup world where the data is encrypted, there's nothing you can do. But my sort of background was in genomics. Be able to, and so I'm very interested in those kind of specialist tweaks in file systems that are domain specific, right? So if you store this kind of, nucleotide file with this kind of, it can be quantized like this, and effectively, it's almost like if you save this, you can store it as a lossless JPEG. I think there's lots of interesting things you could do, but
especially now since data is used to train.
Yeah.
Reading it and providing the format in which you want the data to be, if that can be done on the storage, that would be useful.
So a really popular company is Vast Data. They started with S3. S3 is really nice in as much as as well as getting the file and the file path, you get the immutability checksums of it, right? And you go, so therefore I know this is the same version. I know I can cache it. And you can have tens of thousands of caching nodes right next to your GPU. So you've got exactly the right files, whereas other file systems may have had to keep on going back to your parallel NFS server. Having the extra metadata along with the sort of checksums makes a huge forked distributed proxy really easy, really, And so those are the kind of things that I think why S3 is used more and more for AI training and things like that. But I think that's a really interesting topic.